Rowan did not move. For a long moment. The only sound inside the storm-sealed archive chamber was the distant wind pressing against the ancient tower walls. Vivian became aware of her own heartbeat. It echoed through her chest, uneven and fragile after everything that had happened. Her hand still rested lightly against his wrist. Warm, steady, real. She should have stepped back. She should have remembered who he was. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories. Instead, neither of them moved. Something shifted in Rowan's expression. Not enough for most people to notice. Vivian noticed. The silver in his eyes seemed less distant somehow, as though a wall she had never seen had begun to crack. Then footsteps echoed faintly from the upper staircase. Voices followed. More than one. The spell broke immediately. Vivian withdrew her hand. Reality returned all at once. The palace. The storm. The secret she had spent 6 years protecting. Rowan turned his head slightly toward the archive door. His posture changed. Alert. Focused. Listening. The voices carried no alarm, only curiosity. Questions. The kind that grew quickly inside a palace filled with servants and nobles. Stay here, Rowan said quietly. The words carried calm authority rather than command. Vivian nodded. Rowan stepped into the corridor and closed the door behind him. Silence settled over the chamber once again. Alone beside the fire, Vivian wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The warmth did little to calm the unease growing inside her chest. Tonight had changed something. She could feel it. For years she had survived by remaining invisible. Invisible people were safe. Invisible people were forgotten. But nothing about tonight felt invisible anymore. Several minutes later, the door opened. Rowan returned. Snowflakes clung to the shoulders of his dark coat before melting into the wool. Vivian immediately searched his face for answers. What happened? She asked softly. Rowan removed his gloves and placed them on the table beside the fire. People noticed the guards. Vivian's stomach tightened. Rowan continued. Some are already asking why the storm sealed. Archive required royal attention. The room felt colder suddenly. Questions. Questions became rumors. Rumors became attention. Vivian lowered her gaze. I never wanted any of this. Rowan was quiet for a moment. The firelight flickered between them. I know. Her eyes lifted in surprise. Rowan met her gaze steadily. I have watched you for days. Vivian's pulse stumbled. You avoid attention whenever possible. You work harder than everyone around you. And every time someone notices you, you look as though you would rather disappear. Heat rose to her cheeks for reasons she could not explain. Rowan's expression softened slightly. You carry everything alone. The words settled somewhere deep inside her. Because they were true. For 6 years, she had carried fear. Carried secrets. Carried loneliness. Always alone. Outside, the storm continued to bury Blackthorn Palace beneath fresh snow. Somewhere above them, a bell rang softly through the night. Midnight. Rowan glanced briefly toward the ceiling before returning his attention to her. By morning, he said quietly, more questions will come. Fear flickered across Vivian's face. Rowan saw it immediately. His jaw tightened. Then he took a single step closer. Not enough to overwhelm her. Just enough that she no longer felt alone in the room. Let them ask. Vivian stared at him. Rowan's silver eyes never left hers. You are not facing them alone anymore. The words stole the air from her lungs. Neither of them knew that by sunrise, Blackthorn Palace would be speaking of only one thing. The servant the Alpha King refused to leave behind. Vivian barely slept. Long after the fire burned low and the storm continued beyond the tower walls, Rowan's words remained with her. You are not facing them alone anymore. By dawn, pale winter light filtered through the narrow archive windows, turning the snow outside into a sea of silver. The storm had weakened, but the unease inside her chest remained. Questions were coming. She could feel it. When the archive doors were finally unsealed, Rowan personally escorted her through the lower corridors. The palace seemed quieter than usual at first. Then Vivian noticed the glances. Servants carrying baskets slowed for half a second before looking away. Clerks paused in conversation when she passed. 2 attendants standing near a staircase immediately lowered their voices. Her pulse stumbled. They did not know the truth. Not yet. But they knew something had happened. Rowan walked beside her without speaking. Tall, calm, unshaken by the attention surrounding them. Somehow his presence made the whispers feel farther away. As they entered the eastern wing, a familiar voice called her name. Vivian. Clara hurried toward her from across the corridor. Relief appeared on her face before confusion quickly followed. Her gaze shifted from Vivian to Rowan and back again. I have been looking everywhere for you. Vivian tried to answer, but Clara lowered her voice first. The entire records department is talking about last night. Fear tightened instantly inside her chest. Clara glanced around before continuing. Nobody knows exactly what happened. They only know royal guards were sent to the archive tower during the storm. Rowan remained silent. Yet the corridors seemed to grow still around him. Clara suddenly remembered who stood beside Vivian and bowed respectfully. Your Majesty. Rowan inclined his head politely. Nothing more. Nothing less. The simple gesture somehow eased Clara's nervousness. Miss Hale will report to the archives later this morning, Rowan said. She has had a difficult night. Clara blinked in surprise. So did Vivian. The Alpha King did not explain himself to servants. Everyone knew that. Yet he had done exactly that. Rowan continued walking before either woman could respond. Vivian followed automatically. They reached the upper records wing several minutes later. The familiar scent of parchment and ink greeted her. Usually the archives felt safe. Today they felt different. Every desk seemed occupied. Every conversation seemed to stop for a fraction of a second when she entered the room. Supervisor Kent emerged from his office carrying a stack of ledgers. His sharp eyes landed on Vivian immediately. Then they shifted toward Rowan. Confusion flickered across his face before disappearing beneath. Professional caution. Your Majesty. Rowan's expression remained unreadable. Miss Hale will be excused from morning assignments. Kent hesitated. Only briefly. But Vivian noticed it. Of course, Your Majesty. Silence followed. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Rowan turned toward Vivian. Get some rest. She stared at him. Rest. The word felt unfamiliar. No supervisor had ever suggested such a thing. Rowan glanced toward the archive windows where fresh snow drifted through the morning air beyond the glass. The Winter Council resumes this afternoon. Something unreadable passed briefly through his eyes. Thoughtful. Calculating. Then it vanished. There may be additional questions in the coming days. Vivian's stomach tightened. Rowan looked at her steadily. If they come, they will come through me first. The room fell completely silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Even Ken appeared stunned by the statement. Rowan turned and walked toward the door without another word. Moments later, he disappeared into the corridor beyond the archives. Only after he was gone did the whispers begin again. Softer this time. More cautious. More curious. Vivian stood motionless beside her desk, surrounded by dozens of unanswered questions. Across Blackthorn Palace, however, another question was already beginning to spread. Why was the Alpha King protecting a quiet archive clerk nobody had ever noticed before? The rest of the morning passed far too slowly. Vivian tried focusing on ordinary work. Filing records. Organizing inventories. Updating archive references. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every whisper seemed louder. Every glance seemed sharper. Several clerks stopped talking when she approached. Others offered polite smiles that carried far too much curiosity behind them. By noon, the tension hanging over the records department felt impossible to ignore. Clara eventually appeared beside her desk carrying a bundle of correspondence. You should eat something, she said quietly. Vivian looked up from the ledger she had been pretending to read. I am not hungry. Clara lowered her voice. Then at least tell me what happened. The question settled heavily between them. Vivian's fingers tightened around her pen. She wanted to answer. Clara had always been kind. But the truth was too dangerous. Nothing happened, she said softly. Clara's expression suggested she did not believe a single word. Before either woman could continue, a palace messenger entered the archive wing carrying a sealed document marked with the royal crest. Conversations immediately faded. The messenger approached Supervisor Kent directly. Kent broke the seal, scanned the contents, and visibly stiffened. A strange silence spread through the room. Then Kent looked up. His eyes found Vivian instantly. Her stomach dropped. Miss Hale. Every head in the department turned toward her. Vivian slowly stood. Yes, sir. Kent hesitated for half a second before speaking. You have been requested at the council offices. The room seemed to stop breathing. Council offices. Not archives. Not records. Council. Vivian felt her pulse stumble. She had spent 6 years avoiding attention from important people. Now important people were requesting her by name. Clara stared openly. Several clerks exchanged uneasy looks. Even Kent appeared unsettled. Now, Vivian asked quietly. Immediately, fear settled heavily beneath her ribs. Yet refusing was impossible. A short time later, she found herself walking through the upper administrative corridors once again. Snow drifted beyond the tall windows overlooking the palace grounds. The Winter Council had resumed its meetings. Advisors moved through the hallways carrying reports and legal documents. Noble representatives spoke in low voices as they crossed between chambers. More than once, Vivian noticed conversations stop as she passed. The rumors were spreading faster now. By the time she reached the council wing, her hands felt cold despite the warmth inside the building. A royal attendant escorted her through a set of carved oak doors and into a private reception chamber. The room was elegant but quiet. Sunlight reflected across polished stone floors. A fire burned softly inside a marble hearth. Vivian immediately recognized Rowan standing near the windows. Relief appeared before she could stop it. Then she realized he was not alone. Two senior council advisors stood nearby reviewing documents. Both men turned toward her the moment she entered. Their expressions were polite, professional, curious. Vivian's pulse quickened. She suddenly understood why Rowan had looked so thoughtful that morning. Questions were no longer spreading through the palace alone. They had reached the Winter Council. One of the advisors closed his folder slowly. "Miss Hale," he said, "thank you for coming." Something in his tone made unease crawl through her chest, because it sounded less like a request and more like the beginning of an investigation. Vivian remained standing near the doorway while the two council advisors studied her with quiet interest. Neither appeared hostile. That should have been reassuring. Somehow it was not. The older of the two men gestured toward an empty chair beside the fire. "Please, Miss Hale." Vivian sat carefully, her hands folded together in her lap to hide their slight tremble. Rowan remained near the windows overlooking the snow-covered palace grounds. Silent, watchful, the younger advisor opened a folder resting on the table. "You have served in Blackthorn Palace for 6 years?" Vivian nodded. "Yes, sir." "Primarily within the archives?" "Yes, sir." The questions continued. Simple at first. Routine. They asked about her work, her responsibilities, the records department. Nothing unusual. Yet the longer the conversation lasted, the more uneasy she became. Because none of the questions felt accidental. They were building toward something. The older advisor finally closed his notebook. "Several department supervisors speak highly of your work." Surprise flickered across Vivian's face. Praise was not something she heard often, especially from people she had never met. "Thank you, sir. You have also earned a reputation for helping others." Heat touched her cheeks. "I only do my job." The advisor exchanged a brief glance with his colleague. "That is not what they said." Vivian lowered her eyes. Across the room, Rowan remained silent. Yet she could feel his attention. Steady, unwavering. The younger advisor leaned back slightly. "Miss Hale, do you know why you are here?" Her pulse quickened. "No, sir." "Then allow me to be direct." The room suddenly felt smaller. The advisor folded his hands. "The Winter Council is aware that unusual circumstances occurred during last night's storm." There it was. The real reason. Vivian felt her stomach tighten. "I understand. What we do not understand," the older advisor said gently, "is why His Majesty chose to place a records clerk under personal protection." Silence followed, heavy and impossible to escape. Vivian's heart pounded. She did not know how to answer, because she was asking herself the same question. Before she could speak, Rowan finally moved. He crossed the room in calm, measured steps, and stopped beside the table. The advisors immediately looked toward him. So did Vivian. Rowan's expression remained composed. "You are questioning the wrong person." The older advisor raised an eyebrow. "Your Majesty?" Rowan's silver eyes remained steady. "Miss Hale did not request my protection." The room went silent. Nor has she sought attention from anyone within this palace. Vivian stared at him. Rowan continued. "If there are concerns regarding my decisions, direct those concerns to me." Neither advisor spoke immediately. The statement had been polite, respectful, yet unmistakably firm. For the first time since entering the chamber, some of the tension eased from Vivian's chest. The advisors exchanged another glance. This one carried understanding. The older man eventually nodded. "Very well, Your Majesty." The discussion shifted after that. Formalities, council schedules, department assignments. Yet something had changed. The questions no longer felt aimed at Vivian. They felt aimed at Rowan. And Rowan had stepped directly between them. When the meeting finally ended, the advisors departed quietly. The chamber door closed behind them. For several seconds, only silence remained. Then Rowan looked toward Vivian. "Are you all right?" The simple question caught her off guard. Vivian swallowed carefully. Why are you doing this? Rowan held her gaze. Snow drifted beyond the windows behind him, soft and white against the winter sky. For a moment, it seemed as though he might answer. Instead, a palace attendant suddenly appeared at the doorway carrying a sealed message marked with the crest of the Winter Council. The attendant bowed. Your Majesty, an urgent request from the council leadership. Rowan accepted the message. As he broke the seal, something cold settled beneath his eyes. And for the first time that day, Vivian sensed that whatever came next might change far more than palace rumors. Vivian watched Rowan fold the council message with calm precision, but the change in his expression lingered long after the paper disappeared into his coat pocket. Something had shifted. The quiet certainty she had begun to feel inside the reception chamber faded once again. Rowan looked toward the attendant. Inform them I will attend shortly. The attendant bowed and departed. Silence settled over the room. Outside the tall windows, snow drifted gently across the palace courtyards. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Rowan turned toward her. You should return to the archives. Vivian nodded automatically, though questions crowded her mind. She hesitated near the doorway. Was it bad news? Rowan seemed to consider the question. Not yet. The answer did little to ease her concern. Yet something about the honesty in his voice made her trust it. Rowan moved toward the door and opened it for her. Go. Vivian stepped into the corridor. The door closed softly behind her. As she walked back through the council wing, she became increasingly aware of how many eyes followed her. Council aides, messengers, visiting representatives, people she had never met before. Somehow they all seemed to know her name now. The realization left an uncomfortable ache beneath her ribs. By the time she returned to the archives, the atmosphere had changed again. Conversations stopped when she entered. Not completely, not obviously, just enough for her to notice. Clara was waiting beside her desk. Relief crossed her face immediately. There you are. Vivian managed a small smile. I was only gone an hour. It felt longer. Clara lowered her voice. More rumors. Vivian's stomach tightened. What kind of rumors? Clara glanced around. Before answering, some people think you are being transferred to the royal offices. That is ridiculous. Others think you uncovered something important in the archives. Vivian almost laughed despite herself. That is even more ridiculous. Clara smiled briefly, but the amusement faded quickly. There is another rumor. Vivian's pulse quickened. Clara hesitated. Some people think the council is unhappy about how much attention the Alpha King is giving you. The words settled heavily between them, because unlike the others, that rumor felt dangerously close to the truth. The rest of the afternoon passed beneath a cloud of uncertainty. Vivian tried focusing on work, but her concentration drifted repeatedly toward the council chamber and the message Rowan had received. As evening approached, Supervisor Kent emerged from his office carrying several documents. He stopped beside her desk. Miss Hale. Vivian immediately stood. Sir. Kent studied her for a moment. His usual sharp expression seemed unusually thoughtful. You have worked here a long time. The unexpected statement caught her off guard. Yes, sir. Kent nodded slowly. Long enough to know that palace attention rarely arrives without consequences. A chill moved through her chest. Before she could respond, Kent continued. Whatever is happening, be careful. Then, to her complete surprise, he walked away. Vivian stared after him. Careful. The warning echoed in her mind long after sunset painted the archive windows gold. Later that evening, as staff prepared to leave for the night, a royal courier entered the records department carrying another sealed envelope. This time the messenger approached Vivian directly. Every conversation stopped. Every eye followed the exchange. The courier offered a respectful bow. Miss Hale, His Majesty requests your presence at tomorrow's Winter Council Assembly. The room fell completely silent. Vivian's breath caught. Because this time it was not a private meeting. Tomorrow, the entire council would be there. Vivian slept very little that night. Long after the palace corridors fell quiet and the winter winds swept across Blackthorn's towers, she remained awake staring at the ceiling of her small room. Tomorrow the entire Winter Council would see her. The thought alone made her chest feel tight. By morning, pale sunlight reflected across fresh snow and filled the palace with a cold silver glow. The summons arrived exactly when promised. A royal attendant escorted Vivian through the eastern halls toward the council chamber. Every step seemed heavier than the last. The closer they came, the louder her heartbeat became. When the great doors finally opened, She stopped breathing for half a second. The chamber was larger than she remembered. Council members occupied long rows of polished seats. Noble representatives from across the northern territories filled the upper galleries. Advisors stood beside stacks of documents and reports. Conversations echoed softly beneath the high stone ceiling. Then the room noticed her. One by one, voices faded. Vivian suddenly felt every pair of eyes turning in her direction. The urge to disappear returned with painful familiarity. She lowered her gaze and followed the attendant toward the front of the chamber. Rowan was already there, seated at the head of the council table. Calm, unmoving. His presence became the only thing preventing her nerves from completely overwhelming her. As she approached, Rowan gave a small nod. Nothing dramatic, nothing public. Yet the simple gesture steadied her more than he could possibly know. The session began moments later. Reports were presented. Trade routes discussed. Winter supply inventories reviewed. Vivian listened carefully, but understood very little. She knew everyone was waiting for the real topic. Eventually it arrived. An older council member rose from his seat. Before we conclude today's assembly, there remains one matter requiring clarification. The room immediately grew quieter. Vivian felt her stomach tighten. The council member opened a folder. Miss Vivian Hale. Hearing her name inside the enormous chamber made her pulse stumble. The man adjusted his glasses and continued. Several records concerning your arrival at Blackthorn Palace appear incomplete. A murmur spread through the galleries. Vivian's fingers tightened together. Incomplete. The word alone carried danger. The council member continued. According to palace employment records, you entered service 6 years ago. However, documentation regarding your previous residence is remarkably limited. Another murmur followed. Vivian felt cold. Very cold. She had spent years avoiding questions exactly like these. Miss Hale, the council member said, would you care to explain? Silence filled the chamber. Hundreds of eyes waited. Memories surfaced without warning. Snow-covered roads. Closed gates. A frightened younger girl carrying everything she owned inside a worn travel bag. Doors that never opened. Places that never felt safe. Vivian swallowed carefully. There is not much to explain. The answer sounded weaker than she intended. The council member was not satisfied. You arrived alone? Yes. Without family. Her throat tightened. Yes. More whispers followed. The questions themselves were not cruel. Yet each one felt like someone opening a door she had spent years trying to keep closed. Before another question could follow, Rowan spoke. His voice carried effortlessly across the chamber. Miss Hale has answered sufficiently. Silence fell immediately. The council member hesitated. Your Majesty, the council is merely attempting to establish a complete record. Rowan's expression remained calm. Then establish it through palace archives. Not through public interrogation. The words were respectful, firm, final. The chamber fell silent once again. And for the first time, several council members began looking less at Vivian and more at Rowan. The council chamber remained silent for several long seconds after Rowan spoke. The shift was subtle, but Vivian felt it immediately. The attention that had been fixed on her began moving elsewhere. Not disappearing, simply changing direction. Council members who had spent the last hour questioning her background now seemed far more interested in the Alpha King sitting at the head of the chamber. The older council member slowly closed his folder. No disrespect is intended, Your Majesty. Rowan inclined his head once. I am aware. The answer was calm. Yet nobody seemed eager to continue the discussion. The session moved forward, but the atmosphere had changed. Vivian remained seated near the end of the council table while reports and proposals filled the remainder of the afternoon. She listened without truly hearing. Her thoughts kept returning to the same question. Why was Rowan doing this? By the time the assembly finally adjourned, the winter sunlight had already begun fading beyond the tall windows. Council members gathered their papers and quietly departed in small groups. Conversations resumed immediately. Some discreet, others less so. Vivian noticed more than one person glance in her direction before lowering their voice. The rumors would only grow after today. She knew that much. As the chamber gradually emptied, she rose from her seat and prepared to leave. Miss Hale. The voice stopped her instantly. She turned to find the older council member approaching. Without the crowd surrounding him, he seemed less intimidating than before. More tired. More thoughtful. Sir. The man studied her for a moment. You have been at Blackthorn for 6 years. Vivian nodded cautiously. Yes, sir. Then allow an old man to offer advice. She waited quietly. His expression softened. Do not let fear convince you that you owe anyone an explanation for surviving difficult years. The words caught her completely off guard. For a moment, she could only stare at him. Before she could respond, the council member offered a small nod and continued toward the exit. Vivian remained frozen in place. Surviving. The word lingered inside her chest long after he was gone. She did not notice Rowan approaching until he stopped beside her. What did he say? Vivian hesitated. Then she repeated the words exactly. Rowan listened without interruption. Something unreadable flickered briefly across his expression. Understanding, perhaps. Or recognition. Before she could ask, another council advisor hurried toward them carrying several documents. Your Majesty. Rowan turned. What is it? The advisor lowered his voice. The records review has begun. Vivian felt her heartbeat stumble. Rowan's expression did not change. And the advisor glanced briefly toward her before answering. Several inconsistencies have already been identified. Cold spread through her chest. The advisor continued carefully. Employment records are complete. Prior residence records are not. Arrival documentation appears unusually limited. Every word felt like another door opening toward a past she had spent years trying to leave behind. Rowan accepted the report without looking away from the advisor. Continue the review. Yes, Your Majesty. Once the advisor departed, silence settled between them. Vivian stared at the floor. The council was searching now. Not rumors. Not speculation. Actual records. Actual answers. The realization made her stomach tighten. Rowan seemed to sense it immediately. Look at me. The request was quiet. Vivian lifted her eyes. Rowan's silver gaze remained steady. Whatever they find, it does not change who you are. For a moment, the noise of the chamber seemed to disappear completely. Then a palace bell echoed somewhere beyond the council hall. Evening had arrived, and for the first time since entering Blackthorn Palace 6 years earlier, Vivian realized that the life she had carefully hidden might not remain hidden much longer. Vivian stood beside Rowan long after the council chamber had emptied. The final words of the records review echoed inside her mind. Inconsistencies. Missing documents. Unanswered questions. For 6 years, she had built her life around silence. Now silence was no longer protecting her. It was drawing attention instead. Snow drifted beyond the tall windows as evening settled over Blackthorn Palace. Rowan remained beside the council table reviewing the report that had arrived earlier. At last he closed the folder and looked toward her. There is something you should know. The seriousness in his voice made her chest tighten. Rowan crossed the room and placed the report on the table between them. The council located a transport registry from 6 years ago. Vivian felt her stomach drop. Rowan continued. Your name appeared on a winter relocation record. Her pulse quickened. Memories surfaced immediately. Endless snow. Bitter cold. The sound of wheels. Rolling across frozen roads. Rowan's voice remained calm. You arrived with a refugee convoy. Vivian lowered her eyes. There was no point denying it. Yes. The answer barely rose above a whisper. Rowan waited. Patient. Quiet. For the first time since this began, Vivian realized she was tired of carrying the story alone. My mother died the winter before. The words escaped before she could stop them. The room became very still. We lost our home shortly afterward. Her throat tightened. There was nowhere else to go. She stared at the floor. The convoy came north. Blackthorn accepted workers. I was old enough to work. The memories felt distant now. Yet the loneliness remained sharp. Rowan listened without interruption, without judgment. When she finally fell silent, he asked only one question. And after you arrived? Vivian swallowed carefully. I stayed invisible. A sad smile touched her lips. Invisible people are easier to overlook. Rowan's expression changed slightly. Not pity. Something deeper. Understanding. You survived. The words reminded her of the council member's advice earlier that day. Survived. For years she had thought survival was something to hide. Yet hearing the word now felt different. Less like shame. More like truth. Rowan's gaze never left her. There is nothing in this report that diminishes you. Emotion tightened unexpectedly inside her chest. For a moment she could not speak. Rowan placed one hand atop the closed folder. The council expected a mystery. His voice remained calm. Instead, they found a young woman who endured difficult years and built an honest life. Vivian stared at him. Nobody had ever described her life that way before. The silence between them felt lighter somehow. Then another thought returned. The council. The rumors. The scrutiny. What happens now? She asked quietly. Rowan looked toward the council chamber doors. His answer came without hesitation. Now I make my position clear. Something steady settled beneath his words. Not uncertainty. Not obligation. Choice. The realization made her heartbeat quicken. Rowan gathered the report and turned toward the exit. Tomorrow the council will meet. Again, he paused beside the doorway and looked back at her. Snowlight reflected softly in his silver eyes. And when they do, they will hear the truth from me. For the first time since the questions began, fear no longer felt like the strongest thing inside her. Hope did. The following morning, the winter council chamber filled earlier than usual. Word of the records review had spread throughout Blackthorn Palace. Advisors occupied their seats. Noble representatives gathered in the galleries. Even palace staff seemed unusually attentive as the assembly prepared to begin. Vivian stood near the rear of the chamber, her hands folded tightly together. The familiar weight of nervousness lingered inside her chest, but it no longer felt overwhelming. Something had changed the night before. For the first time in years, she had spoken openly about where she came from. The truth had not destroyed her. The realization remained quietly powerful. Across the chamber, Rowan entered and took his place at the head of the council table. Conversations immediately faded. The session began. Several routine matters were addressed first. Then Rowan rose to his feet. The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward him. Vivian felt her heartbeat quicken. Rowan's gaze moved across the chamber before settling on the assembled council members. Before today's agenda continues, there is one matter I intend to resolve. No one interrupted. No one looked away. Rowan placed a single folder on the table before him. The records review. For several days, questions have circulated regarding Miss Vivian Hale. A murmur moved through the room before quickly fading. Rowan continued. The council reviewed her history, her arrival, her employment record, her past. He opened the folder. The review uncovered no crime, no dishonesty, and no cause for further inquiry. Only private hardships that Miss Hale had every right to keep her own. The chamber remained silent. Rowan continued. What they found was not misconduct, not deception, not wrongdoing. His voice remained calm and measured. They found a young woman who arrived in Blackthorn with nothing except the determination to survive. Silence settled across the chamber. Rowan closed the folder once more. For 6 years, she served this palace faithfully. She asked for no special treatment. She sought no recognition. She performed her duties with integrity. Several council members exchanged thoughtful glances. Rowan's expression never changed. Questions were raised regarding my decision to protect her. This time nobody looked toward Vivian. They were all watching him. Rowan's silver eyes remained steady. The answer is simple. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. I protected Miss Hale because she deserved protection. The words echoed softly through the room. Clear, direct, final. Rowan continued before anyone could respond. Strength exists to protect, not to intimidate. Authority exists to serve, not to exclude. Then his gaze shifted toward Vivian. Not briefly, not accidentally, deliberately. The entire chamber noticed. Miss Hale does not need to earn her place in Blackthorn. His voice carried through every corner of the room. She already has one. Emotion tightened unexpectedly inside Vivian's chest. Rowan continued. She belongs here because she has spent 6 years helping build the very community that now questions her right to stand within it. No one spoke. No one objected. My decision is not based on obligation. Rowan's gaze never left hers. It is based on trust, on character, and on the certainty that Miss Hale represents the very values this territory claims to honor. The silence that followed felt different now. Not uncertain. Settled. Rowan finally turned back toward the council. Miss Hale remains under my protection by my choice and with my full confidence. This matter is now closed. The older council member slowly rose to his feet. The council accepts your majesty's judgment. One by one, other members nodded in agreement. No objections came. No further questions followed. The matter was finished. Not postponed. Not delayed. Finished. For the first time since the rumors began, Vivian felt the weight she had carried for years begin to disappear. The council moved forward. The assembly continued. But nobody looked at her as though she were a problem to solve. They looked at her as though she belonged. When the session ended and the chamber gradually emptied, sunlight streamed through the tall windows and reflected across the snow-covered courtyards outside. Vivian stood quietly near the entrance, watching the last council members depart. Several offered respectful nods as they passed. The older council member paused briefly beside her. "Welcome home, Miss Hale." Then he continued on his way. Vivian stood speechless. Rowan approached a few moments later. Neither of them spoke immediately. They simply looked out across Blackthorn together. Finally, Vivian exhaled a breath she felt she had been holding for 6 years. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Rowan looked toward the palace grounds where winter sunlight sparkled across untouched snow. Then he looked at her. A small smile appeared in his eyes. "Now you live." The words settled gently around her. No fear, no hiding, no questions, just peace. As the bells of Blackthorn echoed through the winter afternoon, Vivian Hale realized something extraordinary. For the first time since arriving at the palace, she was no longer surviving. She was finally home.